All right. Well, welcome everybody. Again, apologies for the technical delays, but hopefully everybody thinks that this is worth the wait here. So we're going to talk about, as Joey mentioned, risk mitigation through comprehensive services and maintenance programs. It's a bit of a mouthful. I didn't have a really sexy session title like the dirty little secrets of the water industry, like some people had. So we're just going to have to go with what we've got here. But we're going to talk about a number of different topics throughout the course of the presentation today. I'd like to keep this as, we've got a bit of a smaller group here, so I'd like to keep this as informal and interactive as possible. So if you've got questions, if you want to talk about something as we're going along, just raise your hand, shout it out. You're not going to offend me. I'd rather have the discussion and the interaction. So we'll try to keep it as informal. Anybody that knows me, there's a couple people in the audience that I've met before and that know me, but anybody that knows me knows that I don't like to miss the open bar cocktail hours at any of these events, and I know they've got one going on from 4:30 to 5:30. So we'll try to make sure that we're done in enough time to get everybody to the cocktail hour here. But I want to start by talking about a really non-controversial topic. We're going to talk about healthcare, right? So that's not controversial at all. Anybody here been to see a doctor, been to a hospital in the last 6 months or so? What was it for? No, just kidding. Don't. That's a HIPAA violation. Don't tell me that. That's a HIPAA violation. So we're all probably pretty familiar with the healthcare system, right? So, and I'm not going to ask you what you went to the doctor for, but if you've been to the doctor recently, what likely happened is you probably went in because you were experiencing some sort of symptom or pain or issue, or maybe even just a regular checkup, right? And you go to the doctor, and the doctor will do their screening and their diagnostics, and they'll run through all of their checks. And at the end of that, they'll probably come back and say, I think that you have X, whatever X is, right? They might even prescribe you something. So, the doctor goes through their diagnostics, they say, you've got this, and then they say, okay, I'm going to prescribe you this medication. Well, does the doctor give you the medication? No, you got to go to a pharmacist, right? So you go to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist will then take the information that the doctor has given them. They look at what they've prescribed. They've looked at all of the information that the doctor gives them from the examination. They look at your medical history, and they say, okay, you've taken these different medications, or you're currently taking these different medications. I want to make sure that what the doctor prescribed isn't going to interfere with any of the other medications that you're taking. There's no conflict there with any of the stuff that the doctor's prescribed. So once you're done with that, you get your prescription, you get whatever the medicine is. Did the pharmacist make that medication? No, it was probably made by one of the big pharmaceutical companies in the U.S. or Canada or wherever the company's based out of, right? So a lot of different moving parts, and at this point, I think we all kind of take that process for granted, right? It's healthcare. That's very complex. It's very big. There's lots of moving parts. You've got somebody like a doctor who was maybe a subject matter expert. They've trained for years. You might even have sub-experts within that expertise, right? So you might go to a cardiologist, or you might go to a neurologist or something like that. But there's a lot of different moving parts. And I think a lot of people now at this point, I'm seeing a lot of faces that are like, what does this have to do with metering, right? So my question is, another non-controversial topic, healthcare is expensive, yes? Very expensive, right? Lots of money that goes into healthcare. Do we think that maybe it would be less expensive if we just bypassed the doctor and the pharmacist and the hospital and all those different pieces, and we just went straight to Johnson & Johnson and said, I've got a headache, I've diagnosed it myself, sell me directly the drugs that I need in order to solve this problem, right? Do we think that it would be less expensive if we did that? Anybody? Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, probably. It probably would be, right? It probably would be less expensive. So why don't we do that? Why don't we just go directly to the pharmaceutical companies or the healthcare manufacturing companies and say, hey, I think I've got this. I want you to sell me that drug. It's line item 123 ABC, whatever it is, right? Why don't we do that? Well, it's because I won't speak for everybody else here, but I am not nearly smart enough to diagnose whatever issue I'm having myself, right? There's a lot of intercomplexities and interdependencies within the human body, within the drugs that are manufactured and how they interact with things, potential side effects. There's just a lot of complexity, and that's why we have this system set up where you have multiple subject matter experts within the system that can help you get to whatever the right, medication, prescription, whatever. So it might not be entirely obvious here, but the point that I'm trying to make is that what I just described there, right, going directly to the manufacturer in order to, try to get a cheaper product or a cheaper price on something, that's exactly what we've been doing in the metering industry for years. Right? We've been taking something that is inherently very complex with a lot of interdependencies that touch a lot of different parts of the organization, parts of the utility, and we're just going directly to the meter manufacturers and saying, I want you to sell me an AMI system. Right? I've decided that I need an AMI system. I want to move to advanced metering infrastructure. I want you to sell it to me. Or maybe we even take the step before that and say, hey, let's work with a consultant. They can kind of help us determine what we need in order to move to AMI. And then you go directly to the manufacturer and say, okay, sell me this. This is what I want. And it may sound like I'm saying we've been doing it wrong, and I'm not necessarily saying that we've been doing it wrong. But the point in all of this is that just like in healthcare, there's a lot of moving parts and complex pieces that aren't entirely at the surface level when you start to make that move or that migration to AMI technology. The other part of it is just like in healthcare, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to beat this analogy to death, right? You're going to hear a lot of analogies about healthcare, but just like in healthcare, it's important that you get the right prescription out of the gate, or it's important that you get the right medical device or medical product out of the gate. It's equally as important that it continues to work on day 2, day 5, year 1, year 5, year 10, right? You wouldn't want to just take aspirin for a headache that you have and then within 30 minutes the headache comes back, right? That would not be a very effective treatment for whatever your problem was. So a lot of what we've done in the industry up to this point has been very much focused on how do we prepare and then implement an advanced metering system, and it's really neglected to this point kind of what happens after the system gets put in place. How do we maintain it? How do we keep it going? And so with that, what we're going to talk with that is kind of like the backdrop. What we're going to talk about today is what are those risks when we talk about the risk in a project with moving to an advanced metering upgrade program. What are those risks? How it's led to what I'm going to call the rise of the turnkey projects, right? Everybody in here is probably familiar with turnkey projects. We'll talk a little bit about why those projects or why that type of procurement method really exists in the industry. We're going to talk about why, and I should have asked this question first. Do we have any meter manufacturers, vendors in the room? Any consultants? Maybe a few that just are. I see some Xylem people back there. You guys are lying to me. So we're going to talk about why manufacturers or vendors or consultants are probably not the best fit for what we're talking about here and why we haven't been able to do this to date. And then we're going to talk about what's the alternative, right? How do we solve this problem and move forward? So a lot of good stuff. And again, as we're going along, if there's questions, feel free to kind of jump in. So first question, what are the actual risks, right? And I think anybody here that's deployed an advanced metering system thinks maybe that these are the risks, right? The risk is that I'm going to put the product out in the field and it's going to just break instantly, or it's going to crumble into multiple parts and pieces, and I'm going to have to send dozens and dozens of people out there to fix this failing product that's not working in the field. I've been in the industry for, as Joey mentioned, over 15 years. I've worked for manufacturers. I've worked for consultants. I've worked in a lot of different areas in the industry. And I can't say with 100% certainty that you're never going to have product issues, right? Anybody here that's deployed any sort of technology knows that you're always going to have product issues out in the field. But what I will say is that most vendors or most manufacturers have done a very good job of mitigating the product risk, right? You're always going to have one or two that cause issues, but most of the risk with these types of projects, with these large-scale advanced metering changeout projects, don't revolve around product. And the reason that most of the risk doesn't revolve around product is, again, because manufacturers have done a good job of mitigating that risk through a number of different things, but mainly the technology that's being deployed in the field today. So things like static metering technology that I'm sure we've heard about in lots of other presentations significantly reduces the risk of accuracy decline, right? Because now you've got something that's not mechanical, that doesn't wear, so you're not going to have the same risk of accuracy decline that you would have had with a mechanical style meter. Things like software as a service, or more recently network as a service, reduces the failure points when you compare it to on-premise things. So, who remembers back in the day when you used to have a software platform and you had the server at the utility, you had somebody full-time that was responsible for managing it, they had to go in and do all the updates, all the upgrades. If something went down, they had to go in and fix it, right? Did anybody have on-premise software? A couple hands back there, yeah? That risk is pretty much gone now at this point because of the ubiquitousness of software as a service. There's multiple different data centers all over the world, and so you don't have that same risk around product that you had previously. And the other thing that, and this, I don't know whether people agree with me or not, but COVID has actually significantly increased the quality of production for a lot of manufacturers. And the reason for that is when COVID hit and we ran into these big, massive supply chain issues, right? Manufacturers really couldn't afford to be single-threaded anymore on components, right? They couldn't just get their component from one vendor and exclude all the other ones. They had to have multiple sources for these different products and these different components that went into their products. And because of that, it's increased the robustness and the quality of the different products along the way. So most risk doesn't center around product. Well, what does it center around then? So the real risks associated with these large-scale advanced metering changeout programs rely around services. So it's almost all service-related is where the risk lies. The services required to configure, the services required to install and deploy, the services required to integrate, update your business processes, long-term maintenance services. That's where the real risk for a lot of these large-scale AMI projects lies. And part of the reason that these risks historically have gone unmitigated is most cities or municipalities, as they're thinking about these big programs, these big upgrade programs, spend a very large amount of time looking at the technology that they want to deploy, right? They do a lot of research on what's the right technology, who's the right vendor, should I buy it from Badger or Census or Neptune or Itron? What, should I go cellular? Should I go traditional fixed base? Should I go static metering? Should I go mechanical metering? They spend a lot of time deliberating around the product itself, and then they get to the actual implementation of it and they're like, oh, shoot, we need to find somebody that can actually put this product in the field, right? Especially if you're doing a large-scale change-out. If you're changing your entire system out, chances are you don't have the capabilities to do that in-house. You'll likely have to hire an installation firm or a contractor in order to do that. But in a lot of cases, it's really an afterthought, right? Or, as we'll talk about in a couple of slides, when we talk about these turnkey projects, it's something that just kind of gets thrown into the turnkey project procurement process, and they're like, okay, yes, we want to know all these things about the product and about what you're supplying, and then also, like, you guys need to figure out how to install it too, right? You got to do that as part of it. So it gets thrown into the discussion rather than having a really dedicated approach of what do we want that installation process to look like? How do we want our business processes to change? Moving from AMR or no technology to AMI is a massive shift in how you conduct business as a city or a municipality or a utility, right? And I think a lot of people don't think about that until they actually get the product installed. And now they're getting thousands of data points coming in when they're used to getting 12 data points from every meter per year, right? You're used to getting a monthly billing read. Now you're getting daily or hourly or 15-minute interval reads, and it's a big change. And a lot of utilities don't think about that ahead of time. They wait until after the product is deployed, and then they say, oh shoot, we've got to figure out what do we do with all this data going in? But the main reason that these risks really go unmitigated is manufacturers don't address service or performance risk. And the reason that manufacturers don't address service or performance risk is that manufacturers don't provide service. The meter manufacturer does not actually provide the service to do the installation or do the long-term maintenance after the fact. In most cases, there might be a few exceptions out there, but in most cases, most manufacturers are going to rely on an external third-party service provider in order to do that. And because they don't provide those services themselves, they don't really have a good mechanism or way of mitigating that risk. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not putting any sort of external judgment on that one way or the other, right? I'm not saying that that's good or that's bad. I'm just saying that's how it is. They don't provide that service, so they don't really have a way to mitigate that risk. And it's unreasonable for us as an industry to expect a company or a manufacturer that they would take on all of that risk for something that they don't do. And that's exactly what tends to happen when we do these large-scale changeouts is the city or the municipality or the utility says, well, there's a lot of risk over here. We don't want to assume it, so we want you, manufacturer, to take that risk on. And that has led to what I'm calling the rise of the turnkey projects, right? So who here has seen Rise of the Planet of the Apes? Anybody? Any sci-fi nerds like me who've seen it? Yeah? I won't put anybody on the spot, but does anybody remember how the movie starts? What kind of leads to the rise of the Planet of the Apes? Right? So if you remember the movie, Will, who is the pharmaceutical chemist, again going back to the healthcare thing, right? The pharmaceutical chemist in the story, he's trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease. And so he's testing all of these different drugs, and he tests one on a chimpanzee, and it turns out that it gives this chimpanzee, way above average intelligence. That chimpanzee dies, but was carrying a child. The child, also has that above average intelligence. The chimpanzee ends up getting released into the wild, and long story short, you've got now this super breed of super intelligent chimpanzees, right? And I apologize if nobody else has seen the movie because I just spoiled it for you. But the point of, again, I can feel everybody saying, what's the point, right? Like, why are you telling me this story? Well, the point of this is that just like in the movie, the rise of the turnkey projects has come from a seemingly well-intentioned thought or notion that has significant unintended consequences on the back end of these projects. And so what I mean by that is, what's been the driver for these turnkey projects? Well, the driver for these turnkey projects has been this unmet need in the market for one entity that can take on the complete risk of an advanced metering upgrade project end to end, right? All of the risk associated with the product itself, the services involved with the product, installing, maintaining, all of that stuff, and then the back-end support as well. So there's been a demand in the industry for this type of a program. And the way that it's been kind of packaged by consultants and manufacturers and utilities has been, well, let's just do what we call a turnkey project, right? So we're going to say there's one prime contractor that's responsible for everything. The product, the service, the installation, the maintenance, the software integration, all the things that go along with these large advanced metering changeout programs. So sounds good enough, right? Like that sounds like a good thing that would be good for the industry. Well, much like the well-intentioned byproduct of infecting a chimpanzee with some sort of medicine that gives them superhuman or superhuman intelligence, the problem with turnkey projects is that it doesn't accurately assign the right risk to the right party. And what do I mean by that? And we're going to talk a lot about risk and risk mitigation throughout this presentation, but I think it's important to understand that there's certain types of risk that belong to certain companies or vendors or manufacturers, right? So product risk, so the risk of a product not working properly or failing or something like that, that very clearly belongs to the product manufacturer, right? So whoever manufactures that product, they should assume that risk because, one, they're the best suited person to assume that risk, and two, they have the most direct control over how they mitigate that risk, both for the city or the customer and for themselves. So product risk clearly belongs to the manufacturer. Services risk, though, as we talked about, manufacturers don't provide services. So how could they possibly be expected to mitigate the risk of services when they don't actually provide the services themselves? And what ends up happening is, because they don't provide these services, they don't have a good mechanism for mitigating that risk. And so they're either A, not going to accept that risk and they're going to push it down to their subcontractors, or B, they're going to pass that risk on to the customer in the form of higher prices. Which, again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's kind of the way that these turnkey projects work. And so you might be saying, well, so what? Big deal. So they don't have a good mechanism for addressing that risk. What does it really mean? Well, the bigger issue with turnkey projects that we'll talk about here in a little bit is not so much the fact that they don't have a good mechanism for mitigating risk, but it's more so you as the customer, you as the utility, you as the municipality doesn't have the ability to really choose who your service provider is. So before we talk a little bit more about qualified service providers, let's talk about why should this risk not fall to the consultants or the manufacturers. And the consultants, do we have any consultants in the room? Anyone brave enough to raise their hand? The consultant? Okay, so we got a few consultants in the room. So I will say that in general, consultants have not done a great job in the industry of assigning the appropriate risk to the appropriate party. And I'm not necessarily blaming the consultants. I'm just, it's historically not been really appropriately assigned. But part of the reason for that is consultants are very used to or familiar with dealing with the largest party in the transaction, right? Which is typically the manufacturing company. And so when you have a customer or you have a client that says, hey, we've got all this risk associated with this project, what do we do with it? The knee-jerk or natural reaction is just to say, well, let's give it to the manufacturer because they're the largest company. They have the ability and the wherewithal to absorb that risk. And we know that if something ends up going wrong in the project, we're likely to get some sort of, compensation from the manufacturer because they have the financial solvency to do it. So again, not saying that it's a good or a bad thing, but it's really appropriating the wrong risk to the wrong party. The other thing is the manufacturers and consultants aren't the ones that are actually doing the work, right? They're not the ones that are actually installing the product in the field. And so it's difficult for them to really understand what the potential pitfalls or areas of concern would be when you're doing these large-scale change-out programs. And because of that, it's difficult for them to think about it on the front end of the project and address it in a way that isn't going to impact the timetables or the schedule or the budget of the project moving forward. So again, I told you I was going to beat this analogy to death. Qualified service providers, right? So I know everybody's saying, oh God, another healthcare reference, but bear with me here. So I think that, if we think about every other area of our life, take your utility manager or utility personnel hat off for a second. Think about every other area in your life. When we have a complex need or a complex problem, we look for a highly qualified service provider that can solve that problem. Right? So think about healthcare. If you've got a healthcare issue, you look for a doctor that has the most experience in whatever issue it is that you have, and you go to them and you say, here's my problem, let's figure out how to solve it. If you have a legal issue, right, you look for a lawyer that has, this is another example that normally makes people cringe, right? Nobody likes talking to lawyers. But if you have a legal issue, you look for a lawyer that has the most experience in what it is that you're doing or what it is that you're trying to do, and you say, here's my problem, here's the solution that I want, tell me how we get there. We don't do that in the utility industry, right? We don't look for qualified service providers and then say, here's my problem, here's what I want to get out of it, tell me how to do it. What we do is the equivalent of going to the surgeon and saying, gonna use a Kelly clamp or a Kocher clamp on this wound procedure that you're doing here? And we try to debate with them what the benefit of this clamp versus that clamp is. Or you go to the lawyer and you say, are you going to cite this precedent or this precedent when we talk about how we want to solve this, right? We don't focus on the end outcome. We focus on the details on how we get there. And so, I think, again, in most other areas, we look for these qualified service providers and we let them tell us how to solve the problems that we have. And so what does that, again, taking it back to the utility industry, what does that mean for us when we're looking at these large-scale AMI programs? Well, what we should be doing, and I'm lumping everybody here into this, right? The collective we. What we should be doing is looking for qualified service providers that have done exactly what it is that you want to do, i.e. installed and maintained a advanced metering upgrade program, and have actually been the ones to do it, actually been the ones to put it out in the field. We go to them and we say, here's the problem, here's the outcome that I want to get, let's figure out a path to get there. And what that does then is it gives you, as the utility or the municipality, it gives you the control over who that qualified service provider is. If we think about, again, the turnkey proposal and why maybe the turnkey project is not the most appropriate way to do these types of projects, that takes the control out of who that qualified service provider is out of your hand as the utility, right? Because you're going to the manufacturer and you're saying, here's the technical specifications that we want you to align to. Oh, and by the way, we also need you to install it and maintain it and do the software integration. So figure out who you want to use to do that, right? It completely takes the decision out of your hand in order to identify who that qualified service provider is that's going to help you get there. So what this really does is it gives the power back to you as the customer to determine who that service provider is. And I will say, not to, as a service provider, right? UMS has done a lot of these service providing work in the past. I'll wrap ourselves on the wrist a little bit. We as an industry, there are a lot of subpar service providers that are out there, right? And in the past, historically, there have been some situations where service providers have not provided the quality or the expectation of what it is that you needed as a utility or municipality in these types of projects. And so I think because of that, most people have kind of gradually gone back towards the manufacturer, because you say, this is a well-established company, I know them, I've worked with them before, it just makes sense that we would have them be the prime contractor or have them assume all the risk. But again, it's important to note that this concept of assigning the right risk to the right party is really critical in these types of programs, not just because it's going to potentially reduce costs for you guys down the road, but also because it gives the people that are in direct control of the outcomes the ability to identify and understand how to mitigate those risks. So I think this is a good slide because it really kind of underlines the fact that there really isn't anybody out there that does all of the things that are necessary to do an advanced metering upgrade program. We still are, to a certain extent, very siloed within the utility industry. You've got the meter manufacturer who will maybe do the meter and the endpoint, and probably also will have some sort of software. And then you've got maybe an integrator that can help you with the design and the actual implementation and integrating all your different parts and pieces. You've got your consultant or your engineering firm that can help with the design, and then they can help project manage. Then you've also got some project management pieces on the meter vendor side. So it's very fragmented with who's providing what service. And because of this is where really kind of the turnkey projects go off the rails, because you've got all these different participants that are doing different parts of the project, and you've got one party that doesn't really know or understand or provide all of the other services, taking on or assuming that risk for the project. So, I think the other point that I just want to make on this, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few slides, but See that last bucket on the right-hand side, the maintenance piece, right? This is an area that I think is dramatically under talked about in the utility space today. There really isn't anybody out there now, aside from a few players, but not a lot of people out there now are talking about, hey, the project doesn't stop when everything gets installed, right? You still have to use this, and it has to be functional and working all the way through the life of the system. And what that requires is ongoing maintenance. And so, our viewpoint of any advanced metering upgrade program is that it is an incomplete project unless you have a plan for how you're going to maintain that system going forward. And that plan could be, we're going to maintain it ourselves, and here's the resources that we're going to dedicate and outline to do that. That plan could be, we're going to work with a qualified service provider that's going to help do that maintenance long term. But successful advanced metering projects just don't end after the installation is complete. Hey, I should have asked this at the beginning. Anybody here deployed an AMI system? Couple? Relatively recently, or how long ago?
Ongoing, we're about 2/3 through it.
And everything has worked perfectly, exactly as it's supposed to, and no issues, no hiccups, no nothing?
We're largely doing it in-house, and absolutely not close.
So what are some of the issues that you've, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but some of the issues that you've run into, has it been product related? Has it been installation related? Has it been software related? What are you kind of seeing there?
Cellular coverage.
Okay.
Product evolution and development. Getting a handle on the estimated materials, what the change out causes for meter renews and incidental meter damage, and keeping our distribution up to speed with the pace of the meter change out.
Okay. Perfect. And have you guys kind of thought about what happens after everything gets installed? A little bit, yeah? So you've kind of got a plan in place for maintaining it moving forward? I would say you guys are in the minority of utilities that I've talked to, because most utilities, when they put this program together and they think, okay, everybody gets really excited about the change out, right? Everybody's like, hey, we're going to move from, whether it's drive-by or manual read or whatever, they're like, hey, we're going to put this new technology in place. It's going to be great. It's going to provide, all these different benefits to the customer. They can see their usage online. They can pay their bill online. Much better customer service. We're going to get more visibility into the system. Everybody can get really excited about that, right? Nobody really gets excited for, hey, how are we going to, fix this cut wire when it's out in the field? Or what happens if somebody, well, we're a lot of inside sets up here in Canada, but in a pit set environment, what happens if somebody, takes a lawnmower over the top of the transmitter and cuts it off? How do we solve that problem? Nobody really gets excited for talking about how they're going to address those issues. But, the challenge that we've seen with a lot of these programs and where they typically go wrong is a year, 2 years, 5 years into the deployment, now you've got a system that was working, very, very well, and it's working a little bit less well, and the utility's frustrated because it's not working the way that they're supposed to. The vendor and the manufacturer are frustrated because the utility's not maintaining it the way that they're supposed to. Everybody's frustrated, and nothing's working exactly the way that it should. So again, our viewpoint of these projects is that you really don't have a complete advanced metering upgrade program unless you have a plan in place for how you're going to monitor and maintain that system going forward. What now? What's the correct way? And again, I'm not trying to say the way that we've been doing it is bad. I'm not trying to say the way that we've been doing it is good. It's simply stating the fact that there's been a little bit of this fragmentation within the market on how we deploy and maintain these projects. And for utilities that maybe have gone through it and have experienced some of that frustration, I think there could potentially be a different approach for how we do these large-scale change-out projects that doesn't lead to some of the headaches and the frustrations that we've had in the past. So again, I know everybody's kind of sick of hearing about risk and assigning the right risk to the right party, but realistically, it all starts with assigning the appropriate risk to the appropriate party and making sure that the people that are actually doing the work that is required for these advanced metering upgrade programs are assigned the risk rather than assigning it to the largest party in the transaction or one prime contractor, because it's going to be easier for the utility to do that. So there's a couple of different ways that you could do that. The first way would be having separate procurement contracts for each part of the project, right? So I've got a material procurement. I'm going to set up that contract with the meter manufacturers. I'm going to make sure that I assign the product risk to those manufacturers. That's what they're going to be responsible for. And then I've got a services contract where I'm going to be working with either an installation company or an integrator or some sort of qualified service provider that assigns the services risk to that provider. The other way to do it is because I think a lot of the reason why we've gone towards turnkey projects is they tend to be a little bit simpler for the utility than trying to enter into multiple contract negotiations. There's a sunk cost or a fixed cost associated with procurement processes in general, right? It's going to cost the utility time, money, and effort to go through a procurement process, and it's going to cost them a certain amount for each one, right? Because you've got to invest time and resources in order to do it. So generally, if we consolidate those together, then you can save some time and some money as a utility, and that's why we've kind of gravitated towards these turnkey processes. The other way to do it, if you want to have it all under one contract, is to have that contract with the services provider rather than trying to have that contract directly with the manufacturer. And the reason for that is, again, because you want to assign the right risk to the right party. Most of the national services providers that are out there today that are good qualified national services providers have relationships with all of the major manufacturers, right? So they have the ability to enter into those procurement contracts with the manufacturers depending on what direction the city or the municipality wants to go. And then they have the ability to augment your staff and really provide that true end-to-end support and address any of those risks. So again, I think the idea is you want to identify the outcome of what you want to do, where you want to get to, rather than trying to engineer the path to get there. So rather than saying we want to find a technology that operates in the 902 to 928 megahertz frequency, and it's got to be a point-to-point data collector system, and it's got to have these features and functionalities. Really, the other way to do it, and again, I'm not going to say better or worse, right? But the other way to do it would be identify what you want to have as a business outcome or business objective with this AMI upgrade program, and then work with just like you would work with a lawyer to draft a will, right? Work with a qualified services provider to figure out what the pathway to get there would be. And I think the net for something like this is really providing that high quality and specialized service is really the only way to truly mitigate risk in an advanced metering upgrade program, right? So again, there's product risk. The manufacturers have done a very good job of mitigating that product risk, but when you're talking about that full-scale AMI upgrade program, really the only way to reduce your risk as a utility is to work with a services provider that can really provide high quality and specialized service, and somebody that's been there and done it before. So you guys might be asking now, like, well, why should I believe you, right? Like, how do you know? What have you done in order to prove this? So UMS, the firm that I work for, we've done hundreds of these projects, and the reason why we're able to kind of talk very passionately about what we feel is the other approach to deploying these projects is there's a number of different parts to our business, but as an installation company, we've installed hundreds of AMI upgrade programs, and because we've actually done the installation, we know what the pitfalls are. We've run into them time and time and time again. What makes an AMI upgrade program a good AMI upgrade program versus where are some of the things that you want to watch out for. We've also done a lot of systems integration work, right? We've integrated different software systems, and so we know how to think about that on the front end of the project so that you're not scrambling mid-project to figure out, well, does my CIS system talk to my GIS system? Does it all talk to my meter data management system? How do we address that? And then the last piece, what we call continuity services or ongoing maintenance, we've done a lot of ongoing maintenance with clients in the field, and for us, that's really what we've kind of found to be the key for, how do you make sure that system is operating as well on day one as well on day 1,000 as it is on day one, right? Making sure that you continue to get the benefit out of an AMI system long after the meter manufacturer and the installer have left and the project is done. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.